Good afternoon, fellow believers in Jesus Christ. Here to read the next thing in the last pages of Hinds' Feet on High Places to you guys. May they bless you and administer unto you abundantly in the grace of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Amen. Lessons learned on the slopes of the high places, written during a 3-week visit to Switzerland on my way back to Israel after a short visit to England following the death of my father and the winding up of his affairs. I had said farewell, as I thought, to the old home in which I had been born, and where I had been welcomed back by my father on my furloughs from missionary work in the Middle East. Come up to me into the mount, Braunwald, Monday, May 23rd, 1949. And the Lord said, Come up to me into the mount. And a cloud covered the mount, and the glory of the Lord abode upon the mount, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And the seventh day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud, and the Lord spake through mist and cloud and by a strange path where I could never see more than one step at a time. The Lord has brought me here to Switzerland, to a high mountain apart. I believe that He will speak to me out of the cloud, for I know He has something to say, and I long to hear it. 3 days ago, as I came up in the 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 fun the funicular railway from Linthal to Braunwald in Glarus, there was such thick mist and clouds that nothing at all was visible, not a chalet, nor tree nor wall could be seen, and even the Berg Frieden Deaconess house was quite invisible until we reached the door. The sisters said that for over a week it had been very like that, and it might continue in the same way for weeks longer. Humanly speaking, it was very disappointing to come to Switzerland after so many years' absence and be unable to see anything. But that evening from my wooden in from my window in the huge but that evening from my window in the huge wooden chalet I saw one patch of rocky precipice and snow exposed for a few moments through the driving rain and mist. I had been told that the snow mountains rise in a glorious range just the other side of the valley, but I could never have guessed so from what was visible. Next morning I awoke at 4:30 a.m. and there the mountains were. How right those people are who say that one might just as well not come to Switzerland unless one is prepared to rise before the sun. Now the mountains appeared, still lying in bed. I saw them through the uncurtained window, their tops still buried in the cloud, but a glorious snow and rock range rising like a wall just across the narrow valley. All that day the mist was clearing, but the clouds remained low and still hid most of the view. Today I awoke at 5 a.m. and lo, clear and rosy in the dawn. light against a background of calm blue sky, where the high places I so longed to see. Now I am sitting on a huge green slope, starred with tiny blue gentians, and the buttercups are scattered like gold all around me. This is the brown walled Alp, and the snow mountains rise like walls on three sides of it. I sit here and look out on beauty beyond expression. To the right is an immense cliff over which the Brumbach waterfall leaps down with a noise of many waters. Opposite me is a mountain with huge rock walls and seven peaks rising one above the other. Beside them, though not quite so high, is another peak shaped like a horn. This seven crested mountain is the Ortstock, and the horn is called Hoherturm. This is the mountain that dominates the scene in Braunwald, and it is more picturesque than any of the other neighboring giants. To the left rise great ramparts and ranges of snow and rock, while I sit here in brilliant sunshine. An immense dark cloud has overshadowed the heights, and I hear a distant peal of thunder. So through cloud and mist, I have come to the place on the mount where I believe the Lord is going to speak to me and reveal the reason why he has brought me back to the beloved Swiss mountains after an absence of so many years. The Brumbach Falls. The whole neighborhood is filled with the sound of rushing water pouring down over and between the rocks. For me, the two falls, the Brumbach and the Zilbach, are like two glorious angels of love leaping down from the heights to carry life and power to the valleys far below. Oh, my Lord, what do you want to say to me today? Help me to hear your voice. Teach me to understand the language spoken by your creation all around me. Help me to receive into my innermost soul the great truth that to whom much is given, of them shall be much required. Lifting my eyes, I look across the valley at the Brumbach Falls and see the water pouring itself down in an extraordinary ecstasy of self abandoned giving. And I know now that is my Lord's message to me. I have asked him to help me to understand the language of this book of nature, and the first message and lesson his creation utters is this one. It is so clear that I do understand it. It speaks of love's eternal ecstatic joy in ceaseless blissful giving. Excuse me. 1. The first characteristic of true love is humility, the pouring of oneself down lower and lower in self effacement and self denial. The message of running water always is go lower, find the lowest place. That is the only way to true fulfillment. 2. The next characteristic of love is giving. The poured out life gives life and power to others. The more love gives, the more it fulfills itself, for it is love's prerogative to give and give and give. 3. The third characteristic of love is service. The Brumbach Falls in the act of giving themselves, serve the whole valley and far beyond it. The water means a supply of irrigation, electricity, and light for many, many homes, gardens, and orchards. To be utterly abandoned to the goal of giving oneself to others and going down lower is the joy and ecstasy of love. Perfect love casteth out fear. Yes, that is what the water utters so exultingly as it rushes toward the great, terrifying rocky lip of the gorge and plunges over, utterly abandoned and unafraid of the dreadful depths into which it must fall, down onto the threatening rocks below, watching the waters as they leap over the edge and following them with my eyes as they fall downward, I discover that the whole movement is one of the most breathtaking examples of utter rejoicing and of triumphant, almost delirious abandonment that I have ever seen. If one looks at the falls as a whole, they are marvelously beautiful, but if one gazes at one particular part of the water as is plunges over the lip and then watches it as it falls right down, the almost crazy blissful abandonment is staggering. I never saw motion so utterly expressive of joy. The movement looks like perfect rapture, fearless surrender to a hitherto unknown delight. The greatest it is possible to experience the downward motion is light, adventurous, and perfectly happy. The water, after casting itself over the rocks, seems to be held up and supported as though floating down on wings, a glorious contradiction indeed. How can one abandon oneself in this way? Well, the scene before me answers this question. The falls come down from the heights. Before they can do that, there must first come the experience of He maketh my feet like hinds' feet, and setteth me upon my high places. Psalms 18:33. One cannot get a mighty and powerful fall of water if there is only a low place and a short way for it to fall. It is the high places of faith and obedience which make the falls of love possible. The the Ortstock, the great seven pinnacled mountain opposite, is a wonderful picture of spiritual experience, rising from height to height and peak to peak. The summits of the high places are the powerhouses from which love pours itself down in joyful surrender. One can never truly love until by faith and surrendered obedience one reaches the high places and there learns to go skipping and leaping on the mountains of difficulty as though they were an asphalt road. Everything around me seems to be designed to emphasize this lesson. I have been brought to a place where all God's creation appears to be uttering things in a language which only becomes clearly audible and understood by hearts that have been learning in the school of suffering. It is the language which one begins to spell out in one's innermost soul when one is on a cross to which self is being transfixed by nails of pain and anguish of heart. It compares to the experiences in the siege of Jerusalem and the years in terrorist ridden Palestine which led up to this past year, 1948. Have I not been brought here to experience some great readjustment readjustment in my spiritual nature. Instinctively, the old nature at once cries out, "Oh, will it be very painful? Hasn't there been enough of it already, dear Lord Jesus?" And then I laugh. Shall the clay vessel on the Lord's wheel and under his loving molding hands think of pain in the last stage of a long joyous yielding to his patient fashioning? The only thing that matters is that the adjustment of abandonment to selfless love be made perfectly, so that I stop seeking to be loved and abandon myself to the joy of giving love to others. How beautifully someone has summed this up in the words of an old Quaker lady quoted to me: "Self sacrifice is the ecstasy of giving the best we have to the one we love the most. The sound of falling water and the bells of the cows as they graze on the mountain slopes are the only things audible in this quiet valley, but the sound of the water is continuous. It never stops. It is saying over and over again, the secret of experiencing true love is to go lower, pour yourself down, go lower and lower, give and give and give, and serve with joyful abandonment. Oh, my Lord, how I thank you." The Cecil Bon, Braunwald, May 24th, 1949. Yesterday morning the Lord was teaching me the most fascinating lesson from the Cecil Bon, high above Braunwald on the slopes of Eggstock is the Ortstock house. It stands near a great precipice, and it is connected with Braunwald, far beneath it, by the Cecil Bon, a system of overhead cables slung from lofty pylons fixed in the rocky slopes of the mountain. On these cables, cars are hung which are electrically caused to slide up the cables, carrying provisions to the Ortstock house. As I climbed the gentian starred slopes to my usual prayer and trysting place with the Lord, I could hear the lines beginning to ring overhead, and I kept waiting to see the cars that would go swinging up those aerial lines to the heights far above. I was told that people, as well as cartoons of provisions, could ascend in them. At last, at the end of the morning, I saw the aerial vehicle and got a shock. It was not a walled in car which came rolling down the cable, but just two chairs, similar to ordinary metal garden ones, with a kind of sunshade cover fixed over them. There was no protection of any kind, just two chairs dancing in the air, side by side. In one of the chairs a solitary man was sitting with nothing underneath him but a narrow footrest fixed to the bottom of the chair. Apparently he had been up the line testing the cables. In the evening, as I walked to the Braunwald Alp through a pine wood, I could see and hear that the Cecil Bon was in full swing. One after another, these fragile, completely unenclosed chairs were running up the cables, swinging over fearsome abysses and up the face of a mighty rock precipice. One after another, up they went and down they came in a never ending chain. At first I thought that ever so many people must be going up in them. And then, as I could see no one, I thought they must be empty. But on the way home, I passed the lower terminus or station and saw the chairs swinging into the station shed, all of them quite empty. Then they re-emerged a few minutes later with small boxes and crates strapped onto them. A never-ending chain of supplies was going up to the house on the heights, ready for the expected tourist visitors who, as soon as the mists cleared, would start making the ascent. It seemed to me then that the Cecil Bon was one of the loveliest and most fascinating pictures of faith imaginable, for faith has nothing to do with intellectual belief. Faith is obedience, and faith and abandonment to God's will and power are inseparable. Faith is willingness to do God's will, unless unwillingness to abandon one's own will and to obey God is unbelief. There they were, those tiny chairs with no sides or backs, only a couple of bars, the cable by whose power they traveled overhead and at great distance was quite invisible. Underneath there was nothing but the abyss and no earthly ground of support. All one saw was two moving chairs apparently hanging in the air, but they were supported from above. The power came from above, and by means of that power, they were able to travel upward in defiance of the law of gravity. They went higher and higher, fixed with a wheel which ran up one cable and down another. One had only to be willing to trust the invisible power, sit down on a chair, and abandon oneself completely. No self effort was possible. Then one would be wafted upward to the heights. It was all a matter of faith and no works, except for the initial work of choosing to abandon oneself to the Cecil Bon. But oh, how terrifying that choice looked to me. I am so wary of heights and afraid that panic will send me crazily throwing myself down from the pinnacle. It is a fear that has assailed me all my life and kept me from climbing high mountains as other members of the family loved to do. What if the cable broke or the power failed? Nothing beneath except broken bones or death, no earthly support. I could only too readily imagine that any nervous person or someone afraid of heights would be appalled at the very thought of such a journey. True, there would be nothing to do but rest in the chair and be carried upward. But oh, how easy to get in a panic and fall. How like that overhead cable the promises of God often seem to be. They look so appallingly frail and unsafe, and without earthly support of any kind, apparently leading to such impossible situations. It seems they certainly cannot be relied upon, for we tell ourselves how easily we may be mistaken and claim what was never meant for us personally. Ugh. But only for great, courageous saints of God, prophets, and apostles. But once we abandon ourselves to these promises and enter into them in the abandonment of faith and obedience, then all the overhead power begins to work. The traveler resting on and in the promise does nothing but remain in it. having trusted the promise enough to risk everything upon it, up one goes, and no power on earth can hinder arrival at the consummation of the promise and its perfect fulfillment, though we may seem to meet the most horrifying precipices confronting us and abysses far below, which we could never hope to ascend nor pass over in our own strength, yet in the spiritual Cecilbon of faith and obedience, everything is triumphantly surmounted. For an hour I watched quite fascinated, for my path led up the valley high over which the chairs went swinging on their way to the heights above, and my Lord spoke to me and said, God is not a man that he should lie. Hath he said, and shall he not do it? Or hath he spoken, and shall he not make it good? Numbers 23:19. Fear not to journey on to all the tests and threatening difficulties in the area to which you are returning, as I was with you in the siege of Jerusalem. And though you think that you now have no home to which to return in England, yet I will be with you everywhere I lead you, and in every circumstance in which you find yourself. Oh, yes, one may catch one's breath as one begins the challenging ascent in one of his promises, looking forward to what seems an awfully dangerous precipice. One may feel dizzy as one is swung across and over an abyss between two peaks, but the promises are sure, and trustfully sitting in them, one goes running up to greater things. The torrent, Braunwald, May 25th, 1949. Today I started to walk to the riot out. There was lovely sunshine, and I made my way down through the fields, rejoicing in all the beauty. The fields were golden with the most beautiful kingcups, and dandelions and tiny gentians, like blue gems, were everywhere. The brumback and the zilback falls faced me. I walked rejoicing as though in heaven, awed at the way all nature around me was sounding forth the utterances of God. Ever since going through the siege of Jerusalem in 1948 and being in constant danger of death, it seems that my physical senses have been quickened to enjoy the beauties, scents, and sounds of nature to a far higher degree than before. That is part of the legacy of joy and blessing which those terrifying experiences bestowed upon me. In the old days when I visited Switzerland, as a girl, I used to be thrilled by the beauties of nature in a special way. I loved the scent of the pine woods, of the damp cones and needles carpeting the ground, the sawn logs and moss and lint and lit and lichen covered rocks. But now it all means unutterably more to me. I find nature a book of marvels, the language of which I have just begun to understand and interpret. So I walked in ecstasy with natural beauties around me, speaking forth the praises and character of the Creator. Everything uttered his name. I came to the sawmill beside the torrent which runs down. which runs down the valley from the foot of the Brumback Falls, the water which I saw rushing so blithely over and among the rocks and under the bridge, was the same water which high overhead had come to a great crisis and leaped so exultantly and with such blissful abandonment over the falls. I stood on the bridge and looked at it. Yesterday I had asked myself, what does the water do when, after its magnificent abandoned leap, it reaches the cruel rocks below and there is no longer the ecstasy of leaping down, only a rough rock obstructed everyday course before it. On the bridge I saw and laughed to see what happens to the water. The bed of the torrent was strewn with huge rocks. There were obstructions everywhere, but the water came rushing along, laughing and rejoicing and absolutely delighted to find its way over and around all the obstacles and difficulties. It seemed as happy and cheerful forcing its way among the grim rocks as when it threw itself down over the heights. What a lesson I learned as I watched it. I think almost the loveliest of them, of all of them, day after day, once the leap of obedience has been made, the power of the waters following along behind. Ugh. Added to the steepness of the river bed, makes the surmounting of difficulties and obstacles of every kind a daily delight. Then the meadows of flowers added their lovely voices, emphasizing the message of the rushing waters. They were so small and yet so brilliant. There were so many of them carpeting the fields, and apart from their beauty in a way so unnecessary, I asked the Lord to help me to understand the message He wanted them to give me, and they simply chuckled and sang it to me. We are all we are all Creator God's extra loving kindness and tender mercies. We blossom beside the paths of obedience and all over the fields of life. He makes us flourish to give delight to anyone who may see us. Some people take us for granted as though we are common and ordinary, that it is not worthwhile noticing us. They see no beauty to cause delight, but every worshipping, grateful soul thrills with awe and delight and wonder at the daily blessings and loving kindnesses of the Creator Father. The Hostak and the Gentians. I walked perhaps for 3/4 of an hour to a place where the Ortstock mountain was behind me, and I seemed to be in a completely different environment. The, the seven peaks no longer dominated the scene. Instead, the Riot Alp lay ahead, and all the other snow mountains were seen from a completely different angle. For the first time since my arrival, the clouds rose so high that for a few minutes I was even able to see the the Hostok rising 3,160 meters high. There it was, straight before me, the second highest mountain of the whole range, only cloud hidden Todi being higher. It was also the widest of them all. It rose up like a tremendous pyramid, and its triangular summit seemed to be walled off by a gigantic, perfectly smooth wall of rock on which the snow could not rest. It stretched across the whole peak. It filled me with the new thrill as it spoke forth a new lesson, reminding me of the great and astonishing differences there are in the lives and circumstances of people everywhere around the world. For example, the Ort stock which dominates the scene from Braunwald is far and away the most picturesque mountain in sight, with its seven rocky peaks rising one above the other. It beckons to higher places all the time. It is my special mountain. I love it, for somehow it seems adventurous and in in some ways out of the ordinary kind of life. Constantly I have been challenged to new adventures and leaps to new heights of faith. Moreover, the Brumback and the Zillback falls leap down the mountain's sides, but as the people at the table in the pension house remarked, the Ortstock is the most picturesque and perhaps the most spectacular of the group of mountains, but it does not rise to such heights as do many of the others. Yes, there are some lives that tower up to far sublimer heights than others, which may appear more shadowy and spectacular. My beloved Ort, my beloved Ortstock does not soar so very high. Beautiful though it is, it came to me with great comfort and peace as I walked along the path that privileged and unusual as my lot is to live and work in Jerusalem at the time of Israel's return to the ancient homeland. Yet I am still very small fry. The task I am called to is small compared to others, though my life is adventurous and exciting, but there are other lives in circumstances much less picturesque to look at, which tower sublimely up, like the house stock, to far greater heights of obedience and faith and self surrender. They may appear to have very uneventful slopes and no outstanding peaks until the summit is reached. But oh, how majestically they show forth their Lord's glory when that summit is reached after a brief breath breathless scramble. I came to the Riot Alp slopes chalets are where the cow where the cow chalets are. By then a fine rain had started to fall. How sudden the changes of weather are out here. I find no one bold enough to forecast whether it will be fine or not. I gathered some of the huge gentians which grow on the Riot Alp and then sought shelter under the eaves of a cowshed and hoped for the rain to stop. But soon it was clear that the clouds were descending in every direction, and there was no hope that the rain would end. I hurried down the steep track before the rain would make it dangerously slippery. Then for an hour I walked home through a steady, persistent downpour. The temptation came to repine and resent the rain and to long for the sunshine, but I remembered the message given me by dear friends who had met me at the Zurich airport. Go through each day praising and thanking God for everything that happens. Nothing can take from me the memories and beauties and lessons of these 3 days. So I praised as I walked through the steady downpour, and soon I found that the rain and the clouds and the mist were also sounding forth messages from my Lord. How suddenly the change had come! One moment I was gazing almost breathlessly at the beauty of the house stalk as the clouds lifted from it for the first time. Then, just half an hour later, all the snow mountains were blotted out as completely as if they did not exist. Before I got back to the Bergfried Bergfrieden pension house, all the near all the near all the nearer hills and fields and chalets had disappeared, and mist and rain completely shrouded the landscape. Then my lord said, "These changes come in life too. For 1 hour the vision on the mount, and then perhaps almost directly the descent into the depths of the valley where the vision may seem to be completely blotted out by changed circumstances, but believe steadfastly in what I showed you in the hours of vision and clear sky. The reality is there still, even though a curtain seems to blot it out. You have seen the house stock, and though there is no trace of it now, and it has disappeared like a dream, nevertheless it is there, it is a reality, but the mist and cloud are transient and will pass away, and the true reality appear again. A lovely message indeed, even though the feeling was a rather miserable one of extreme wetness. I reached the pension house of sopping wet, changed into a new outfit of dry clothes, and verily the riot Alp did seem to have disappeared as though out of existence, but there in a vase on my table were the gentians which I had picked on my which I had picked on its slopes. I may not be able to show anyone the riot Alp at present, nor the vision that God gave me yesterday, but the riot Alp is certainly there, as my Gentians testify, and the purposes and plans which God showed me and his pattern also remain true. These little notebooks with their records of what he made me see are like the Gentians, a visible testimony to the eye of faith. Ascension Day, ascent to the highest, Braunwald 7:20 a.m. Now it is all breathtakingly beautiful, although when I awoke it was cloudier than ever, and my precious 2 weeks are nearly half finished already. But as I lie on the bed, the great snow peaks opposite are all shining in the morning light, and the sky is blue. The clouds are no longer gray and heavy, but are white and fluffy. The cowbells are tinkling. The sun is shining, and now the deaconess sisters are going from room to room, singing Ascension Day hymns. They have just stood on they have just stood at my bedroom door and sung, of course, in Swiss German. Now we sing with the great multitude, Alleluia! Oh, yes, Lord Jesus, amen. This morning everything is uttering forth your praise as the mist upon the peaks rolls away and the light is like the shining of your face. And Moses went up into the mount, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And the seventh day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. It is the seventh day since my arrival, and the first perfectly fine one. The mountains stand out clearly against a cloudless blue sky. As I came down the slopes of the Braunwald Alp, From my special trysting place with the loving Lord, the Cecil Bond chairs came swinging down the overhead cables one after the other, and there to my consternation, laughing and gesticulating excitedly over my head were ever so many of the bird frightened sisters. The lady who sits at the same table with me was also there. She had said she would go with me up to the X-Stock that afternoon if it were fine, but evidently I had left the house too early to hear of the change of plans, and they had all gone up that morning without me. I had been left behind, so if I wanted to go up in those terrifying Cecil Bond chairs, which so fascinated me, I must venture in them alone. Once again, a great temptation to feel disappointed leaped at me, and then I found myself praising the Lord and deciding to go alone. Yes, I, who am so afraid of heights and cannot persuade myself even to go up a church tower or look out of a high storied building, and who had been so horrified at the first sight of the aerial chairs was now actually longing to go and to be carried up to the heights in a dizzy looking dangling seat. So after lunch I hurried off to the Cecil Bond station. I was afraid of being afraid, but a strange, exultant urge was upon me, for the Cecil Bond, as a picture of God's promises, had been such an inspiration to me these last few days that I felt I must trust myself to in. I felt I must trust myself to it in actual fact, almost as an outward sign of my inner surrender to God's future plans and purposes. When I got to the station, a real shock awaited me. The man said that something had gone wrong with the electric cable at the top of the mountain, and they were going to stop the ascent and descent of the chairs, but if I liked, I could go up when the last people got down in a short time, and then wait up on the heights while the cable was put right. Even the news that the cable was not in order could not deter me, for I was so afraid that it would rain again the next day. But when I found that no one else was going up and I would be swinging there in the chairs, all alone, it did make me falter. 6 Swiss women had just come along and looked at the chairs and the cable and the heights. They said they were afraid to go and advised me not to go either. I too turned and started to go away, but the man ran after me and said that the chairs were just coming down. So I went back and waited. Then another woman and a girl came along and said they would make the ascent too. At 2:24 p.m., we stepped into the chairs, as there were only 3 of us going up, and the woman and the girl were together in one pair of chairs. I was put in the first pair, with an empty seat beside me. I was all alone. The workman who was to repair the line in the station on the peak had been swung off first. Quite a wide space is left between each pair of chains. I sat and watched him start off and waited for my turn. My heart beat rather tumultuously, but I was astonished to find how calm I felt. I had told myself that I, who was so terrified of heights and big drops, could not possibly go in the Cecil Bond, yet here I was without a companion to talk to me and reassure me, and put a protecting hand over my arm, sitting in the chairs and waiting to be swung off toward the high places. The whole thing had now become a symbol of the abandonment of faith, and I could not turn back. The station attendant grinned at me. The girl in the chair behind me giggled nervously, and they all cried out, Auf Wieders, auf Wieders, auf Wiedersehen, auf Wiedersehen. Goodbye till we meet again. Then the man pulled a handle and my chair ran forward outside the station. For the next 15 minutes, I would be able to do nothing to stop or prevent myself from being swung high in the air and over a terrifying looking precipice. There was nothing I could do even if I panicked. There I there I must sit or throw myself out of the seat. The chairs simply shoot out from the station at great speed, I suppose in order to get a good upward swing like an airplane rushing along the ground just before takeoff. But once outside and high on the line, the running is beautifully smooth and steady. It was wonderful. The green slopes beneath were gold and blue with buttercups, and gentians and snow peaks towered all around. Going up the line, the chairs do not face the precipice, but look out on the mountains of the other side of the valley. Come down. One faces the Ortstock and the Eckstock and its great precipice. Up and up we went, and the height did not seem dreadful at all. Just for one moment, after swinging over my usual prayer place and reaching the ravine with its huge jagged rocks, I did feel a slightly odd feeling which I knew if I gave way to it would lead to real panic. The thought, "Oh, I can't stop and get out even if I want to," sprang into my mind. I gripped the armrest and gasped, "The Lord is my shepherd. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." Psalms 23. Then the feeling of panic passed instantly, and from that moment I was swung upward almost in an ecstasy of delight. As the marvelously beautiful views opened before me, the valleys and slopes were left behind, and the mountains were all around their peaks, drawing nearer and nearer. I could see the chairs with the women, with the woman, and I could see the chairs with the woman and girl coming up some distance behind me. My back was to the precipice and my face was toward the peaks. Then the precipice was actually underneath, and there were higher green, flower covered slopes. Yet still we ran up and up, and then the terminus actually became visible with a rattle. My chair dipped and ran into a long dark shed, and a man looking rather surprised to see a woman quite alone pulled the chairs to a standstill, and I stepped out. The overhead power had carried me to the top on the high places of the X-stock. Leaving the shed, I took a narrow path up a high green slope till I came to the shoulder of the X-stock. There were wide patches of snow and no trees anywhere. 20 minutes of steep walking brought me to the top, and even the station where I had left the chairs now seemed far below. I panted up the last part of the way to the very foot of the steep rock pinnacle, and so arrived at the place where the Lord wanted to bring me. I realized immediately as I stood there and looked all around that this was quite literally the seventh day, and that God was going to speak to me in quite a special way. That was why he had called me up there alone, and not with the group who had gone up in the morning. Now I had 2 hours to spend alone with him on the high places. I sat down on the springy moss and turf. The cold breeze, which had been apparent while we were rising, had now died down. The sun shone brilliantly and warmly. So for 2 hours I sat there and listened to him speaking. His call came to me, and the message of the Cecil Bond also became utterly clear. I know that what he has called me to, he will enable me to do. Faithful is he that calleth you, who also will do it. First Thessalonians 5:24. Amen to that verse. The shoulder of the X stalk is like a wall and watershed dividing two valleys. From this green seat I now looked out on a sister valley, which was also surrounded by snow peaks. Up there it was as though I sat on a throne, high and lifted up, as it were on a stool at the feet of God. The still small voice spoke and said, Hannah, build me here an altar. This time there was no struggle, no shrinking dread, no anguish of surrender, only joy and love and awe and hope and worship. A deep silent delight filled my heart as I realized that the way had been prepared for this, and now I could lay my whole self upon the altar in union with God's will. Amen. On that high mountain, he who years ago in 1924 had called me to offer him a stammering tongue and to preach glad tidings to everyone to whom he sent me in the British Isles and then in Palestine, and had called me to be one of his chauffeurs and then to be a housekeeper for him in the Jerusalem Mission Hospital, now had a new purpose and call, for he said, Now you are to write it all down. Hannah, from now on, you are to be both preacher and writer. Receive the pattern from me and write what I tell you and inspire others by so doing. It was all so still, unemotional, odd and simple. One does not say at such a time as that, but Lord, I can't. I am deluding myself. I'm a crank, a monomaniac. My writing is feeble and ungrammatical and without form and void, and ever so much of the spelling has to be corrected. Know the awe and the deep silence, simple submission and glad gratitude were all that I was conscious of, and a trust that he who called me to this task would give the gift of creative writing and enable me to pass on messages from him. I was to be made bread for others to feed upon. Then flew one of the seraphims unto me, having a live coal in his hand. From off the altar Isaiah 6:6, not this time to touch my lips, verse 7, but to touch my head and my hands, and empower me to use a pen and to type whatever the Lord would give me to share in writing. I knew certainly and surely that there on the shoulder of Exstock, with the beautiful wall of the mountain peaks all around, he had called me to write for him, and had ordained me to use a gift which I had always wanted to receive. It had had to lie in abeyance until now, while I learned to use a stammering tongue in his service instead. 2 hours later, I again entered the chairs of the Cecil Bon to go down the mountain. Down and down they ran, and I sat and looked at the Ortstock and the Hoher and the Hoher and the whole term, and loved them almost as though they were fellow human beings, because they continually uttered forth God's praise, and had been his messengers to me. Gradually the whole circle of mountains seemed to rise higher and higher, as the chairs ran lower and lower, until once more they towered above me. We came to the precipice, and the chair seats faced it, and for a few moments the sun was blotted out. Then came the woods and the green fields. I longed for the chairs to run on and on, bearing me up like a bird between earth and heaven. But the line dipped, and with a jerky rush we ran into the station and touched the ground again. I walked slowly back to the Berg Friedenhaus, my whole being filled with the knowledge that I had been in God's presence, that I had heard his voice and knew his will. I had been carried up to the high places in one of his promises, and brought safely down again. That thought was wonderfully comforting. He will not let me be lifted up in pride. He will give his handmaiden lowliness of heart, and cause her to abide under the shadow of his wings. Cloud and Mist, Braunwald, May 31st, 1949. This is my 44th birthday, and the last whole day in Braunwald. There is a thick curtain of mist, the thickest so far, and no sign that it will disperse. Everything is blotted out save the flowers just underneath my window, and the tiny fir tree beside the path. Once again, it is exactly as though the mountain ranges, the snow peaks, the green valley far below, and all the fields of flowers do not exist anywhere. If a person had never been here before, that one would not even dimly guess at what lies beyond the curtain of mist. All that I have looked upon and loved and rejoiced over has disappeared completely. But it is all there, says the loving Lord, though you cannot see any of it, for it has been completely blotted out and apparently vanished into nothingness. But remember, nothing is missing. It is invisible now, but it is waiting to become visible again. And its last message to you is this: believe steadfastly in the invisible things. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. 2 Corinthians 4:18. I went down to breakfast with my heart singing, I am to be carried up in the Cecil bond of God's promise to the fulfillment of his purposes. and plan. O my Lord, enable me to prepare myself with joy to put on my beautiful garments. Isaiah 52:1, and to go forth to meet God's will with joyful anticipation. The fog outside matters nothing. It is my last day here, and I am unable to go to the prayer place on the mountain slope, but that does not matter either. I ask for nothing better than to spend this last prayer morning, my birthday morning, in this room with you. Lord, let the mist shut us in together. I have listened to the lovely voices of the mountains and the waterfalls and the fields and flowers. Now let me hear your voice and nothing else. The vanished beauties outside matter nothing. Let me see your face, Lord, and lay my hand in yours, and into my heart come singing words from the lovely Song of Songs, the voice of my beloved. Behold, he cometh leaping upon the mountains, skipping upon the hills. Song of Solomon 2:8, June 1st, 1949. From mountain until night. Yesterday, that thick curtain of mist shrouded everything. It never lifted for a moment. And now, this morning, I wake and find it still here. In 2 hours, I must leave this blessed and beloved spot where I have learned so much. The last I saw of the mountains, which have become my friends, was on Sunday when they all stood majestically under a sky covered with black clouds tossed by a fawn wind. That night the mist fell, the rain began, and has lashed down ever since. With one exception, on Monday afternoon the mist lifted slightly, and I walked to Oren Plate, a famous view place. As the mist cleared occasionally in tiny patches, a dazzlingly white mountain would gleam through for a moment as though seen through a window. Once I stood holding my breath as the Skidstockley peak suddenly shone out like a dazzling silver white tower. A few minutes afterward, when the mist had again covered it, another window suddenly opened, and there was the matin stock, high and lifted up, and the sun, which was invisible where I was, shone on it so brilliantly that it looked as though a window in heaven, Malachi 3:10, had opened, and we were looking through it at one of the many mansions, John 14:2, or a palace in the heavenly world. The mist made these isolated peaks look far higher than usual and quite unearthly, as though they really did belong to another world in the sky. So as I walked along, I kept thinking it is only the veil of sense which hangs dark between thy radiant face and mine, as the hymn so beautifully expresses it. Yes, it was as though the Lord drew aside little bits of the veil here and there so that I could look through, so that radiant place on the other side of the curtain. On a clear day, I have no doubt that the view from Oren Plate is very lovely. A funny little aerial cable car runs up to it runs up to it from the valley far below, a closed tram looking like a plump little airplane body without wings according to the postcard pictures of it, not like the open chairs of the Cecil Bon line. That afternoon when I visited it, there was no view to be seen because of the mist, and I think it was almost lovelier for those unexpected fascinating glimpses of the peaks showing through the windows in the clouds were so breathtakingly beautiful. I followed the narrow path along the mountain side, not up nor down, but around it, and oh, the flowers were so beautiful close beside the path. The last field was almost filled with wild pansies, smelling exquisitely sweet and fragrant. When I got to the view place, there was of course no view, only a cafe house loomed through the mist and a notice on the fence which said, "There is no other way to the view place except through here." So I turned around and hurried home, rejoicing in the flowers and the scents and the mist, and with the words singing in my ears, "Believe steadfastly in the invisible, hold on to what God has shown you, though it appears to have no substance at all. Faithful is he that calleth you, who also will do it." 1 Thessalonians 5:24. When I left Braunwald in the mist and went down fun in the funicular railway to the valley far below and back to the roads and automobiles of all kinds, none of which can make the ascent to the heights of Bromwald, I received a last message through the flowers. There they were in the mist, wet and lovely and ever so abundant, the tall spiked purple and blue ones in thick clumps of rich color, and the carpets of little ones spread over the slopes reminded me of the meadows I had seen above when the sun shone and gilded the golden kingcups and the gentians, and I thought of Narcissus, the Narcissus fields toward which I was traveling, whose beauty had lingered in my memory for 27 years, since the time when I went there with my mother for the last holiday she spent on earth. Then it shone into my understanding that the message of the flowers was not just a reminder of God's loving kindnesses and tender mercies in our own daily lives, but just like all the beauties of nature which have been uttering forth his messages to me and telling me what God wants us to understand through them, so the flowers speak of the beautiful loving kindnesses and tender mercies which he wants to shower on others through us, just as the Brumback Falls remind me of his love pouring through us to others, and the peaks speak of the high places of faith to which he wants to lead us in order that we may pour ourselves down with life bringing joy to others. So our daily walk is to be like flower filled is to be like flower filled fields offering beauty, comfort, cheer, and encouragement to everyone around about us. Yes, indeed, this visit to beautiful Switzerland was not just for my own delight and pleasure, but so that I might have the privilege of sharing it in some God given way with others. Who knows, perhaps even these little daily quiet time notes may some time or other be used by him for that lovely purpose also. Visit to less advance. For for 9 hours I travelled from one end of Switzerland to the other, and at 3:30 p.m. reached Lausanne on the Lake of Geneva. Then the journey continued on up the mountains to Les Avants. But even here, so far away from the Glarus Mountains, the peaks were also hidden in mist. Finally, at 5:10 p.m., the, fun- the, funu- the funicular rail landed me at the Hotel Salute. It is a very lovely hotel, and I have a delightful room overlooking the lake. Already, after unpacking on this first evening, I have gone for a walk. Now I make now I make a now I make a confession. My feeling as I walked back to the hotel was one of real disappointment. Even though it is very beautiful here, and only the mountains are mist shrouded. Of course, I am tired, and I miss my dear familiar mountain friends who taught me so much during the 2 weeks at Braunwald. But that is not what causes the disappointment, and it is not that the narcissus have gone by, for they are perfect and make the mountain slopes shine white as though they are covered with hoarfrost, but it is also steep either up or down, and apparently no pleasant level paths along the sides of the slopes, and worse still, all the narcissus fields appear to be out of reach. They are wired off with fences, placarded with big notices which say it is forbidden to enter the narcissus fields beside the road without permission from the owners. This I had not expected. 27 years ago, my mother and our friends wandered freely wherever we chose, but now it all seems commercialized. Of course, it is a famous and much advertised beauty spot, especially at this time of year when the narcissus fields are in full bloom, and I suppose they must be preserved of, or the flowers would all be picked and carried off and sold by others. But it is a blow where I am to go apart to meet the Lord. Did I come to less advance to be faced with such a disappointment as this on my way back to all the unrest and threatening war in the Middle East? I did pick a tiny handful of narcissus flower narcissus flowers which were blooming just outside the wire fence, and I saw the fields of them shining white in the evening light. But yes, I was homesick for Braunwald, and now this morning there is a steady mist and rain, and I have only 4 days to spend here before I must leave and continue on my journey. Evidently my Lord has something very important to teach me, and I do want to learn it. One thing I can do radiantly and gladly is to go through each day praising for everything that happens, for the disappointments as well as for the joys, for disappointments accepted with praise always seem to turn into extra radiant blessings. One verse keeps echoing in my mind and heart in connection with these fenced off narcissus fields, which I have traveled so far to see, hoping for the joy of sitting among them. again and listening to my Lord and finding that I cannot reach them even if the sun comes out. What a contrast between the free, lovely fields of Braunwald and the wired off narcissus fields of less advance. But very tenderly and gently the Lord keeps reminding me of the verse in the Song of Songs. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Song of Solomon 4:12. Isn't that just what my life has been like until my beloved Lord began breaking down the fences piece by piece? A show garden shut up and closed to so many ordinary people in whom I have felt no interest. Now my heart is to be made like open fields of flowers for the joy of others, as it is written in the same lovely song, Awake, O north wind, and come thou south, and come thou south, blow upon my garden that the spices thereof may flow out. Let my beloved come into his garden and eat his pleasant fruits. I am come into my garden, my sister, my spouse. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. Eat, O friends, drink, yea, drink abundantly. Mont Blanc and the way into the Narcissus fields. By 5 p.m. on the first day, the mist began to lift, and there, spread out below, was the Lake of Geneva, shining like burnished brass as it reflected the evening sun, which I still could not see. For 2 hours I sat by the window watching it clear. The lake became a picture of radiant peace and joy, while the clouds slowly lifted and rolled away. At 7 o'clock the crown of the day came, for at last there was clear blue sky and sunshine. When I went out to the terrace, I looked up and saw all that I had traveled so far to see. There were the mountains I had known and loved as a little girl of 4 and 6 and 8 years old. When I had visited Switzerland with my parents, the Dent du Midi and Mont Blanc itself were now absolutely clear and free from cloud, radiant and glorious beyond words. Later on, I leaned out of one of the upper windows with two of the chambermaids. Well, fellow believers, I'm going to stop there for now and finish and read the rest of the pages tomorrow. God bless you guys and have a wonderful day.